Welcome everybody. Today we are talking hip flexors and stretching your hip flexors. And more importantly, stretching your hip flexors in Anjaneyasana. Right, so low lunge with the knee down, that stretch. And first I just want to break down anatomy real quick. I'll be real brief. Right, so you got your femur, you got your hips, and you got your hip joint, you got your pelvis. What do your hip flexors do? Well, they flex the hip. They bring the knee upwards. They flex the hip. Right? Well, his joint. He needs some more yoga. Right? His joints are a little bit stiff. But the hip flexors also do other things. So when we talk hip flexors, we call them hip flexors because that's their primary function. But hip flexors also adduct. They squeeze in. They also help with abduction. They also help with extension. Right? And the best way to stretch hip flexors is through extension. But what I want to show, right, is your hip joint, your femur, and your acetabulum, right? And it's covered with like a little membrane or like a little, if you ever watch the NBA or watch basketball, right, a shooter sleeve, right? They have that kind of neoprene sleeve that goes over their arm for compression, or a compression sleeve, right? And it goes over this, and it holds the synovial fluid and some other ligaments in there and supports it. And then around that you have ligaments and tendons, right? You have a lot of ligaments that get in here, right? And then you have your hip flexors on top, right? You have some hip flexors here, right? That's just kind of the top of it. You have your psoas, which connects your spine just below the ribs here to your ilium, and then from your ilium to your femur, right? To your femur. Right. That also works as a hip flexor, but your psoas is mainly the deepest core muscle. It mainly acts as a stabilizer to the spine and a shock absorber. It rarely kicks into hip flexion, right? Until you're about a little bit, this guy's kind of stiff, right? Above 90 degrees, so you're up here. That's when it kicks in. Because the psoas really connects about here, so you can see most of this is above the hip joint with a little bit below. Your main player, and this is why I'm so picky, and if there's one pose that I don't have another word besides this, anal, about a certain pose, is Anjaneyasana, right? And the reason for it is your main hip flexor, the main hip flexor that does the majority of the work, runs, right, from your hip, right there, then connects down by here. It's one of your quad muscles. It's your rectus femoris, right? I'm just kind of messing this all up with this thing. Hopefully you get the idea. But it connects from your hip, runs through your knee, right? It's your rec fem. It's one of your quad muscles. So if we are spending most of our time here, thinking our hip flexors are here, we're missing a large portion of our hip flexors, right? I just showed it. It ran all the way down. And it's your primary player. So if you're not fully stretching your primary player, are your hip flexors ever going to get less stiff? Probably not, right? If 2/3 of it or even 3/4 of your muscle you're never getting into, it's probably not going to get any better. So let me move this guy back out of the way so I can show you, right? So Anjaneyasana, right? A fundamental posture, one that I teach probably in 99% of my classes, right? 99% of my classes. Why? One, there's a lot of variations you can do out of it with your arms and with your legs. But two, it's a little low impact, right? It can be held a little bit longer. It can be, you can add a little bit more intensity to it in a less degree, right? If I'm in a crescent lunge, right, I'm still getting kind of into the same muscles, but I can't sit here very long without getting these muscles tired. So Anjaneyasana, what I want you to do is experience this with me up front, right? As I come into it, this is how it's normally taught, right? Go way down deep into the hip flexors, and I want you to feel this. Reach the arms up. This is beautiful. This takes a really great looking Instagram picture, and that's why we do yoga, right? For Instagram. That's the only reason we do yoga. But if you decide, I want to do yoga actually for something else besides Instagram, right? Let's actually get into our hip flexors. But I want you to feel, where is it? Right here, kind of right at where that coin pocket would be on your jeans, right here. Right? And where that is the very top of the hip flexors, but more where it's at is right here. That's your hip capsule. Right, that's that shooter sleeve, that neoprene sleeve that is holding your joint in. That's supporting your joint. That's supporting the synovial fluid. Right, that's there for support. Not meant to get much more mobile unless you're working with a PT or somebody. Right, so right there we are putting all of our load into the front of that hip capsule. We're just jamming that femur right in there, going, yeah, let's get in there good. I wouldn't recommend that unless you're working with somebody to rehab something, or you're working with a PT or a doctor. Other than that, right, PT, for those of you in like the UK and stuff, that's physio, right, with your physio. Right, but bring the hips back over your left knee. Shorten your right foot a little bit. So you're more vertical, right? Hips over knees, low back over hips. And then firm your left foot into the floor. Now your toes can be tucked on this back knee. And you're now going to start to feel from your knee through your hip. And we talked about, right, hip flexor, primary one. Rectus femoris runs from here. Man, this guy's got some issues with his knee, right? You got to run from here down. It blends into the quadriceps tendon, which runs over the knee. So your rec fem runs from here, there. Your primary hip flexor. So we are getting into our primary hip flexor here. Right, left foot pressing down, pulling forward. Now to add on to this, to get even more into the hip flexors, right? To get in there even deeper, take your peace fingers, grab a hold of your hip points. I actually like to take my peace fingers, grab a hold of my pubic triangle. I think this works better. Grab a hold of some flesh and just lift up. A little bit of tailbone down. Right, so now you feel that stretch grow from your knee through your hip. Now you know I got that rec fem. That thing is stretching. My quads are stretching. I'm still up here in my hip flexors. And I'm pulling forward. Right foot pulling back. Why are we doing that? Might as well strengthen the hamstring while we're at it. If you want more from here, inch that right foot a little bit forward. Keep the pelvis lifting up, hips forward and down. So imagine your pelvis is like a bowl of water. If my hip points are going down, here, water spilling out. I want to be here where the bowl is neutral and the water is staying in my bowl. I always want the water to stay in the bowl in Anjaneyasana. I can feel from my knee all the way through here. So now my hip flexors, all my hip flexors are stretching. Right? Let's do the other side, just so we can feel it. Just however you want to switch sides. You can always go through down dog, step forward, doesn't matter. Right, but first, let's feel it. Boom, let's get in that beautiful Instagram picture. Someone take a picture, right? This is going to be glorious. It's going to get everybody to click the heart button. Right, but where are you feeling it? Right there in the front of the hip. Up towards the top. That's my hip capsule, right? That's where my femur, I'm on this side now, right? We'll go this way. So it's opposite. I'm here, right? I'm right into this area right through here. The top part of my hip flexors, but more importantly, I'm into the capsule. I'm getting the top part of my rec fem, but I'm not doing anything down here, right? Not doing anything down here. I'm not really even getting into my psoas. For your psoas, you really need a little bit of a side bend, right? And I can show that here in a second too. But go down here to the knee, right? So I'm not getting into that. So what do I want to do? I want to bring my hips back because I want healthy joints. I want my hip flexors actually to get longer, not just feel like they're getting longer, right? Press into my right foot, firm it, feel from my knee through my hip, and now pull the right foot forward. Left foot presses down, pulls back. Take my peace fingers, grab a hold of my hip points, or maybe my pubic triangle, lift up, right? Lift the hip points up. If I want more from here, inch that left foot forward, hips a little forward and down, but keep that pelvis neutral. Right foot pressing down, pulling forward. Engage your right glute. Also, draw the lower ribs in. If you want to reach the arms up, reach up. So again, this isn't the most pretty picture, right? The other one looked more dramatic and more like, oh, I'm flowing, I'm feeling the earth, all that kind of stuff. This one just feels like, man, I'm working hard, but woo, those hip flexors, right? That rec fem, that rectus femoris, that thing's getting some stretch here. Take one more breath in. And then just release, right? Come back onto your shin, sit back. Right, if you want to get into psoas, or if you just like, I like to push my hips forward, offset your load, right? It's about the load, right? Again, you're not going to get your full hip flexors being here. I'm not getting really deep into my rec fem. But if I want to get up into here a little bit, take some load off. That way that femur is not jamming with all your weight down onto that hip capsule, right? The ball is not jamming into it, right? And then to get into psoas, you want to work your hips forward and down for most of us, right? Most of us are going to want to work the hips forward and down. And then I take my left arm up and over for a side bend. But I want to let this leg be passive. When I'm in Anjaneyasana, I want these hip flexors to be strong. We sit all day. Those hip flexors are weak and they're tight. So when we pull it forward and we press down, man, those hip flexors are working hard, but whoo, they're getting a nice stretch. This is a lot more work, right, than this. This is not as pretty, this is. So if you want to get that Instagram picture, boom, reach up, snap the picture, and then bring yourself back up and go, let's get into these hip flexors a little bit. Right? But if you're like, I want to still get into this spot, it's totally fine. Again, it's about load, right? Right, it's about load. Come onto your back, set a block underneath your hips, draw your right knee in. The left heel either hovers or it's here. Right, engage that quad. What I actually like to do is take that left leg up toward the ceiling, flex the foot, engage the quad, and then slowly lower that heel to my end range, pause for a moment, maybe pulse just a little bit, and then hold in that end range. I'm getting a nice stretch into these hip flexors, and you can always add another block, or you can increase the height, decrease the height, whatever you need. But now you get into the spot, but it's not under a heavy load, right? Because under a heavy load, we have all of our weight bearing down. Bring this guy out just a little bit, and we're here. And that's jamming into this neoprene sleeve, right into your shooter sleeve, right? You're here. Whereas when we have it on our back, it's not all the weight right here, right? So those muscles can stretch a little bit. So if you want to do that, come onto your back, draw your one knee into your chest, other leg long. Otherwise, when you're doing Anjaneyasana, be here, left foot down, pull forward, lower ribs in, glute engaged. Maybe then the hips go forward and down, but the hip points stay lifted. If you want to, if you're like, Tate, I cannot practice yoga unless I'm here, then take some load off, right? Take some load off. Be here. Okay. All right, so try that out. I promise you practice like that, especially a active-based Anjaneyasana where you're pressing the foot down, pulling forward. Not only will your hip flexors get longer, your hip flexors will get stronger. And like I mentioned, we sit all day. Those things are short. They are weak. So the more we can lengthen them, the more we can strengthen them. Because you don't want to just stretch a weak muscle, right? You want to strengthen that weak muscle. So the more we can do that, healthier, happier hip flexors, healthier, happier hip joints, healthier, happier body, healthier, happier practice. I promise you. Active range of motion, getting into all the hip flexors, lead to a better quality of life, not just a better looking posture. Make sense? Right? Try it out. Let me know what you think. Thank you very much.